We wanted to talk to everybody first.
I've been talking for a while. I mean, I'll come into the office every week. You come in about 2 days.
Should be a little button, right?
Do you have a requirement to be in together, all together one day a week?
Yes, you should be started.
Depends on who you refer to as you, right? There's lots of different things. Yeah, it's usually by team. For me. But it's different for others. So. All right, guys, see you in a minute.
One of these computers is host. You signed into one of them as.
Might be this.
You don't speak at that.
It's not the hub. You didn't.
It's this one.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's after 12, and in order to respect everyone's time, if you could find a seat, I'd like to have us try to go ahead and get started here. Great, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pam Sebesky. I'm the chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB's October 19th meeting to order. Welcome to all of you, especially those of you here with me in person, and also to all of you that are joining us virtually today. I trust the audio and video connections are working well for those of you participating virtually. As always, please call, email, or text staff if you are experiencing any technical difficulties. We continue to live stream the audio and video of this meeting on TPB's YouTube channel. I will briefly review the process staff has devised for the hybrid meeting. Members in the room, please use the microphone when you speak, and please be close to the microphone so that those online and those watching the broadcast can hear you. Those participating online, a friendly reminder to mute your microphones always, and importantly, to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you speak. Members who are participating virtually, please know that staff is monitoring the chat, so feel free to post your comments or questions in the chat, and staff will get it to me. You can also use the raised hand icon if you wish to be recognized. I will also make sure to call of you during the discussion and votes. While we have started accepting comments from the public in person during our in-person meetings, we are continuing the practice of receiving public comments online to limit the number of people present in the room. After staff's roll call today, I will first recognize members of the public who are here to provide their comments, and then I will ask the staff to report on comments received online. A copy of comments received online is available to us on the meeting web page. Lynn, would you please take a roll call of board members participating in the meeting today and confirm that we have a quorum?
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to list the name of your agency or jurisdiction, and if you could state your name, I'll record you. I'm also monitoring the participant chat. So we'll start with DC Council, Ms. Pinto. DC Council, Charles Allen.
Allen's here.
Thank you. DC Council, Christina Henderson. Here. Thanks. She's in the room, by the way.
Perfect, thank you.
DC Department of Transportation.
Leslie Rupert for the director.
Thanks, Leslie. DC Office of Planning.
Marine here.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County. I just sent Jason the link. He will be here. College Park. Frederick County.
Mark Mischler here for County Executive Gardner.
Thanks, Mark. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thanks. City of Gaithersburg.
Dennis Dunslinger, present.
Thanks, Dennis. City of Greenbelt. City of Laurel. Montgomery County. Gary Ehrenrich, present. Thanks. And I'm pretty sure I saw Evan Glass online. I'll keep that up. I'll keep looking.
I'm here.
Oh, thanks. Oh, I see him. Yeah, I see him. Prince George's County.
Vic Weisberg.
Thanks, Vic. Anyone else from Prince George's County? City of Rockville.
Bridget Donald Newton, present.
Tacoma Park.
Casey Costick, present.
Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis present.
Thanks. And Jeff Hirsch is also online. Maryland House. Thanks. Maryland Senate. Okay, moving on to Virginia. City of Alexandria.
Koenig present.
Arlington County. Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here.
Thanks. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger here.
Thanks. Loudoun County. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky here.
Thanks. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Ruschel here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch here.
Thank you. Virginia House.
And look at David Reed present.
Thank you. Virginia Senate. WMATA.
Mark Phillips, present.
Thanks, Mark. Moving on to ex officio, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission. I did hear from Julia she was going to participate virtually, just so you all know. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service. That concludes. Thank you. That concludes roll call. I will monitor the participant chat to capture you all. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. And now I'm going to call the names of those who have signed up to provide comments in person for us today. First time we have had in literally years. So I will welcome Bill Pugh, Coalition for Smarter Growth, to the podium for public comments.
Good morning, Madam Chair and TPB members. It's great to be here in person. In 2021, the TPB voted nearly unanimously to do an early update to the Visualized 2045 plan. And the impetus was so that it could model multiple build scenarios and show in concrete terms what it means for the region to act on its policy goals for climate, land use, and equity. And this vote was critical to the agreement that allowed the plan update to proceed back that summer without major changes to remove projects. But it appears that that's being left out of the process that's proposed by staff, and you'll hear in agenda item number 10 today. The Coalition for Smarter Growth, and I'm sure a number of members here and members of the public who've been involved, ask you for a true apples-to-apples modeling and comparison of multiple build scenarios using the regional travel model. This means alternative long-range plan packages and supportive transit-oriented land use and housing consistent with the 2021 TPB board resolution. And we understand there's a lot of tasks involved in this update, and so if more time is needed to accommodate this, developing and modeling alternative, then we hope the board can ensure that that's provided and that there's also the accountability for that and the zero-based budgeting process. Without this, we're simply going to repeat the past process, and it's really going to be an administrative exercise. But there is no pressing federal deadline. There is time to do this right. There is time to make this meaningful. So we hope you will revisit that 2021 resolution that several members, such as Councilmember Evan Glass, Councilmember David Snyder, multiple discussions were instrumental in bringing about. And if you go back and look at the meeting minutes, even it refers a lot of times to the build scenarios. And as TPB Director Kanti Srikant said, the plan update will include multiple build scenarios and an analysis of each scenario's impact on the region's adopted goals and targets, including reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really important to making this a meaningful exercise. We appreciate the amount of staff time, not just TPB staff, but all your jurisdiction staffs that will go into this just to do the administrative requirements. So if that's all this is, then it's really not going to be worth it. But we have an opportunity here. We have very little time to meet our climate targets by 2020, to meet other targets that COG has adopted with housing that have tremendous transportation benefits. So we ask for this scenario analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn, were there any comments received electronically? I don't have anyone else that's signed up. I'm assuming no one else has signed up. Are there any comments received electronically that you could please summarize for us?
Yes, thanks. So between the September 2022 TPB meeting and noon yesterday, October 18th, we received 2 comments submitted via email. A memo with a summary as well as the actual comments are found on our meeting page. So you've heard from Mr. Pugh. His comments, his written comments are also on the meeting page, so you can read them at your leisure. We were also forwarded a letter from via email from Arlene Montemurano that was signed by various state and local elected officials, directed to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Maryland Department of the Environment to deny permits related to an application submitted by MDOT for the I-495 and I-270 Phase 1 South Toll Lanes project. As I mentioned, these comments and email and letters are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, as always, we start with the review and approval of the minutes of the September 21st, 2022 meeting. I invite a motion to adopt the minutes as provided. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion. Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Okay, are there any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes? I'll start with anyone in the room. Okay. Staff, are there any members online who wish to be recognized? No. For the vote then, are there any nays or abstentions from those in the room?
I think I'll abstain. Ann Wheeler abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay, Ann Wheeler abstain. Okay. For those online, are there any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia, Maryland?
Dennis Enslinger abstained. I wasn't present.
Okay.
That was Dennis Enslinger that was not present and is abstaining.
Okay. That was from Maryland and Virginia. Other agencies. Okay. Looks like that passes unanimously with 2 abstentions. Okay, now to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of the October 7th meeting. I will recognize Jason Groth, the past chair of the technical committee, who chaired the meeting this month. Jason, is there anything you would like to highlight or expand on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, we covered a couple of the items as you see in your agenda packet that are on today's agenda. A robust discussion as always. Probably the only thing to highlight is we also had some informational items that might be of interest to the committee, such as an update on the MOVES 3 model that's put out by EPA, as well as motor vehicle emission budgets, and how they play into the SIPs. We talked a lot about the public participation evaluation, which was really an interesting discussion, and I encourage those, if you have questions about that, to talk to the TPB staff, because that's an ongoing and developing effort. And then, of course, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plans. That actually is a really fascinating presentation. I encourage you to look back at the materials from that agenda, what's going on nationwide. So if there's any questions for me, I'm here, but otherwise I'll pass it back to the chair.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for Jason from anyone in the room? Okay, how about staff? Are there any members online who wish to be recognized? No, great. Thank you, Jason. Moving on now to the Community Advisory Committee report. We have a written summary of the October 13th meeting. I will recognize Ashley Hudson, Chair of the CAC. Ashley, is there anything you would like to highlight or expand on?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Sebeski. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Hudson. As mentioned, I'm the chair of the Community Advisory Committee. The Community Advisory Committee to the TPB held a hybrid meeting last Thursday. 5 people came to the COG office and 6 people joined the meeting online. This was the first time CAC members have met in person since February of 2020. It was very nice to meet people in person for the first time and get to have the natural flow of ideas, especially for this session as we held an open discussion about the public engagement process. We were joined by folks from Foursquare Consulting who shared results of the recent survey and asked open-ended questions about our perspective on the public participation process. The group was happy we continued to meet and that public outreach events and initiatives such as online forums and QR code surveys continued to happen virtually through the pandemic. However, some folks expressed concern and even frustration that public outreach happens simply to fulfill a requirement and that comments are not truly considered by the TPB. Others said they felt they weren't aware of issues even until after the fact. So the group discussed ways to engage more people in each of our jurisdictions, such as setting up an information table and collecting contact information at local fairs, farmers markets, and other events. Staff noted that TPB and COG staff have attended these types of events in the past and agree there's an opportunity to get involved again. There was a suggestion that TPB and CAC members attend one event in each TPB jurisdiction annually. So that way each jurisdiction has the opportunity to be reached into. Members also suggested that county and city websites should include TPB materials. We also discussed how to move forward in the new normal. Ideas about changing meeting times, hosting more hybrid meetings, and balancing old and new members were some of the topics we touched on. This is especially important as we reach the CAC recruitment period in the coming weeks. So there was positive energy from both the online and in-person participants, and we are hoping to collaborate on ways to stay engaged in the coming year. So this concludes my report, and I will gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm glad that you all finally got to get back into in person and see each other. Are there any questions for Ashley from anybody in the room? Okay, staff, are there any members online who wish to comment? Great. All right, thank you, Ashley, very much. Okay, moving on now to the report from our Director, Conti. We have a written summary of the October 7th Steering Committee meeting and a report on other items of interest. Conti, is there anything you would like to highlight and anything new to share with the board?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. Since you have a copy of my written report, I will not review it in detail, but I will provide a very brief overview. There were a couple of TIP amendments that the steering committee approved on October 7th. The first one was from the District of Columbia that provided updated funding for the DC Circulator South Capitol Street facility improvements, the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative at Buzzards Point, and also the Southwest Waterfront Climate Initiative project. The second amendment that the steering committee approved was at the request of Virginia Department of Transportation that updated the funding for the Nebraska Mills Road widening project. So, under the letter sent and received, we did follow up per the board's advice and submitted the formal comments to the federal docket on the U.S. Department of Transportation's proposal to add greenhouse gas reduction target setting as part of the MPO's performance-based planning and programming program. That's a proposal. The TPB comment to the federal docket indicates support for that proposal and noting a few technical updates to their proposal. There were also a couple letters of support for the new Reconnecting Communities federal grant, one in the District of Columbia and one in Prince William County. This is a brand new program that aims to address some of the inequities that was created, the legacy inequities from the development of the roadway transportation system. We are glad to see members already taking advantage of this new program. There was also a letter of support from the TPB to Loudoun County's application for some state grants for transit ridership incentive program. This is a Commonwealth of Virginia grant, not a federal grant. A few announcements to draw your attention to. First, the TPB's annual fall Street Smart pedestrian and bicyclist safety program will be getting underway. The first event will be a webinar on best practices in pedestrian enforcement on Thursday, October 27th. The intended audience for this webinar is the law enforcement officers. The second event is the official fall campaign launch press event. This is slated to be held November 17th, Thursday, and it will be hosted by the District of Columbia this year. The second announcement is related to some continuing work on improving roadway safety in our region. You were briefed at your September meeting by David Petrucci of the Federal Highway Administration on their new approach called Safe Systems Approach. We are planning to follow up that discussion, that briefing, with a planned work session for the board members, where we will be inviting the safety officers from the 3 state DOTs to discuss with the board what initiatives have been underway, what new approaches they are considering to improve the roadway safety outcome. We are hoping that that will be in November, but certainly it will be held before the end of the year. The last announcement, members should have received an email invite to COG's annual membership awards luncheon on December 14th. You will need to register to attend. TPB has always been part of this annual luncheon event, so I would encourage members to consider attending that. Lastly, a couple of updates, a couple of good news updates. First, I'm happy to inform you that the TPB and COG have received a couple of federal grants. The first one is for about $125,000 with $25,000 provided by WMATA to transition the Commuter Connections Reach a Ride tool to a one-call, one-click information and referral assistance tool for transportation options in the region, particularly for those who are mobility challenged. The second grant is for $325,000 with about $62,000 provided by these 3 state DOTs to develop a pilot test of an open source cross-platform mobile application where we could consider using van pools that are already operating on the region to also serve as on-demand transit. If there are communities, if there are people who are on a route where there is no transit service available, if there is van pool operating in the nearby vicinity, they could consider using that. This will be a pilot. This is sort of an on-demand system. We are going to try that, and we are very pleased to have some federal support to test this. The second update, I'm very pleased to inform you that COG staff completed their greenhouse gas inventory work. This is something that they do once every 2 to 3 years. And the latest inventory that was developed for the entire region, for all of its 23 member jurisdictions, was for the year 2020. And I emphasize 2020 because 2020 was also an important year for the regional greenhouse gas goal. The region had adopted a goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 20% below 2005 levels by 2020. The good news is that you all in this region, through your efforts and through assistance from the federal and state programs, we have achieved that goal. In fact, the reductions, the region's greenhouse gas inventory stood at 24% below 2005 levels. So that's the good news. We can make available the presentation that COG received. We will try to get that presentation to this board as well. But the COG board adopted a resolution commending all of you, your member jurisdictions, for your efforts, recognizing this very important milestone, but also at the same time noting that this should really provide us the impetus, the momentum to stay on this path and to to redouble our efforts and commitment because there is more to be done, because our goal for 2030 is a 50% reduction. So we are 24%, we have 25% more to go, but we have little less than 8 years to get there. So that's the good news. So that completes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, but congratulations on the grant. That sounds great for all of us, so that's awesome. Does anyone in the room have any questions for Conti?
I've got one.
Sure, go ahead, Or.
I think it would be a great idea if we were able to use the van pool vehicles. We also probably should be looking for grant money to see if we can get those to be electric vehicles as soon as we possibly can. That would be another positive aspect of that. And in terms of in the communities where vehicles of one dimension may work, would also lower the greenhouse gas emissions in those regions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lewis. I think last year when Mr. Allen was chairing, as we were beginning to think of coming out of the COVID, one of the things we learned was the essential workers or the transit-dependent community and the people, and how much of a burden it was and that the pandemic disruptions caused. So Mr. Allen asked us to think about how can we at the TPB work to assist in rebuilding that transit ridership, not just rebuilding it, but having an improved system, particularly bus ridership and bus service system for the region. So that was the impetus for us to start thinking, what can we do? What are some of the ideas? Took us a little while to do some research of best practices, then pursue some funding. So we are certainly glad to have that. And today on your agenda, you will hear another thing that we have done, which is a transit equity study that we have done in our region, particularly focused on bus transit equity. So that's an update that you will see. The TPB does not operate any system. We don't fund any system. But these are the kinds of things that we can do in terms of highlighting, providing some data and providing a forum for discussions on best practice.
Yeah, and the reason why I mentioned that is that as a follow-up, the NEVI grant program has 2 discretionary grant programs, and we're still waiting for the guidance. Hopefully we'll have it sometime in November, a corridors and a community grant program. So hopefully, there'll be some funding there, that would support recharging for initiatives like that, for mini buses or whatever type of vehicle we could use for like on-demand transit applications. So
excellent. Thank you.
Great. Is there anyone else in the room that has a question before I move to the people online? Okay. I'll ask the staff. Is there some...
Mr. Snyder has his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Snyder, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Conti, first of all, just absolute applause for the work that we're doing on both greenhouse gases and safety. And I think we have a little better story on greenhouse gases than we do on safety at this point. So your continued presentation of that particular issue to us is very important because we continue to lose ground on safety issues, not only here, but nationally. So I'm hoping we can come up with a comprehensive region-wide policy building on the work we've already done and applying the recommendations from the prior work and actually start to reverse the trends that we see. Secondly, the public speaker today asked about the planning going forward and made some requests, and I'm wondering if you had any initial reaction and whether, in addition to that, you can get back to us with your responses to the public speaker today and what we all ought to be doing, perhaps more than we're doing.
Absolutely. Today, agenda item 10 is the first of the regular updates and discussions and feedback and collaboration with the board that we will be having in this update. So you will hear under item 10 today what the proposal is, and we'll come back to you again next month because we will have additional draft documents that we'll be bringing to you, and then in December and then in January. So there is much more on that whole thing, and you will hear about that. But one thing I can say is that the staff proposal is consistent with the resolution in spite of what you might have heard today. The resolution said that this update will consider the findings of the scenario analysis, multiple build analysis. That is exactly what staff is planning to provide the board. So we'll hear some more about that later today. But very briefly, we have looked at, within just the past 10 plus years, this board has spent a little north of $3 million to $4 million, and we have done about 10 to 11 scenario analysis. That is a pace of a scenario analysis every 14 months. We've been reading those documents. They are about 700 to 800 pages. We completely acknowledge it is unreasonable for this board to expect your transportation and transit agency staffs to have all of those hundreds of pages of reports that this board has put together that shows what are all these scenarios and what are their impacts on the TPB goals. So we recognize that once we started reading it, so we said, okay, we need to make this easily accessible and understandable. What is the purpose of any scenario analysis? To tell us how the outcome could be different. So we've been reading those documents, all the hundreds of pages. We are hoping to bring it to you in 25 pages or less to say, here are the 30 different scenarios we have analyzed, and this is what each of them, the analysis, modeling analysis has indicated you will get if you do that. So we are pulling that document together, and it's been a lot of work, but I think that's one of the things that you will see. The scenario analysis, for me, somebody who's been doing this for a little north of 30 years, I found it a little hard to imagine after going through all those 800 pages of any scenario that we had not conceived and examined. Some of them I found extremely hard to believe that we can implement it, but we didn't hold back. We said, okay, let's imagine if you push all the way through, what are some of these scenarios? So you'll see that, but there's a lot of information there from the scenario analysis, right? Including the climate change mitigation scenario study that we did. The long-range plan task force, not only did it analyze 10 explicit scenarios of alternate build, before that, in phase one, it did absolutely no build or an all build. So there's a lot of work that has been there, but it's not within easy reach. So you will see all of that coming through. And we truly hope that all of those scenario analysis findings is informing all of you, because the decisions are being made by you at your jurisdiction level. I also note one other point, Mr. Snyder, since you asked me to respond or give my early thoughts on the comments. There's a sense that this is an opportunity for us to do something different. I would respectfully say that this board has always had that opportunity. Every time a scenario analysis was done, dating back to the late 1970s, the intent was to give it to the members of the TPB and to help have them use the findings to inform the projects they bring forth to this board. So this is not a unique thing. It is a continuing thing. But what is certainly unique is making that the center and the focus of the updates, which is an excellent thing. I'm very, very pleased to be part of this process. You'll hear more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Certainly. Okay. Seeing no further, go ahead, Gary. I had already asked for the room, so I didn't realize that there was someone else.
Thank you. No, Gary Ehrenridge, Montgomery County. One of the points in the presentation, the public presentation, that people had assumed, and I had assumed prior to recently, that we could do this leisurely, that it was a 2-year update and we had 4 years to do it. but you explained to me, and I think to the Tech Committee, that we don't have extra time other than the end of 2024. Can you explain the parameters that led you to say that timing is actually of the essence this time?
Sure. With apologies to my colleague Stacy, I don't want to steal some of her gunpowder, but the issue is our long-range plan was approved 2 months ago. So the federal mandate is we need to update it by 2026, 4 years from now. The TPB said, no, let's do it by 2024. That's great. One of the things we realized is the federal requirement is the plan at any given time should cover a minimum of 20 years moving forward. Right? So if our next update is 2026, our current plan goes only through 2045. So approaching 2025, our plan would not be in compliance with the federal requirement for it to go 20 years, which means if any of you want to make any amendments, move some money around, change some funding amounts, we can't do that. So we had to do this. So that's one of the reasons I said I'm so very glad we said that we are going to do it in 2024. So the 2024 update will now have an out year of 2050. Not 2040. Interestingly, that coincides with our greenhouse gas goal here and other things as well. And Montgomery County is in the process of adopting their Thrive 2050, and Northern Virginia Transportation Authority is going to a 2050 plan. So it's good for the TPB plan to be consistent with that. That is one part of it. The second part is, and you will hear some of this under item 10, before the TPB can adopt a new plan and get its conformity approved, it has to have new motor vehicle emissions budgets established. That is not entirely within the TPB's purview, but it is within the MVAC purview, and it is the state air agencies. We were aware of that. We were planning, and we have been working with the air agencies to do that in calendar year 2023 and get the EPA approval so that in 2024 we can do it. One of the things we've just learned just a month and a half ago is that the EPA has no plans to revoke an earlier standards, 2008 standards. We are working on the 2015 standards, and we assumed that they would revoke the 2008 standards. They said, no, they have no plans to do that. What that means is we have to now revise the emissions budgets that were set for the 2008 standards and also develop a new set of emission budgets for the 2015 standards. So this is almost like 2 SIPs having to be done within 1 year. And again, if we don't do this, the 2024 update, we cannot submit it for federal approval. So these are the 2 developments that have come. The decision to update the plan in 2024 was really insightful. It was a good decision, but that was done last year. There have been some developments. So that's part of the reason why we have to stay focused on getting everything approved by 2024 December.
Any further questions? Okay. We're going to then, seeing no one else online, and I believe that's correct, we're going to move on then in the agenda. To Chairman's remarks, I will like to, Conti's already spoken to this, but congratulate all of us on the region achieving its greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2020. That is truly a milestone achievement that each of us can take pride in. It is also very encouraging given that just a few months ago we adopted a greenhouse gas reduction goals for the transportation sector for 2030. Knowing that the multi-sector actions we are all taking at the local and state level with the assistance of many federal actions has helped reduce greenhouse gases. In a way, it affirms that the strategies in the transportation sector that this board adopted have the potential to further reduce greenhouse gases and help us achieve our 2030 goal. I call on all of us to double down on our commitment to implement these strategies as expeditiously as possible, since the task ahead of us is to achieve even larger reductions in less than 10 years. Conti, please see if we can be briefed on this COG greenhouse gas inventory report next month. If we are unable to find that time next month, please provide us with a copy of the staff presentation and COG's resolution on the matter.
Sure, will do.
Thank you. On one other administrative matter, we had previously announced that our November meeting would be virtual and the December meeting would be in-person hybrid. However, the staff has indicated that it will help with the planned repairs of this boardroom to change our December meeting to all virtual and change our November meeting to an in-person hybrid. Also, the December meeting is just a couple of days before the holidays and schools will also be closed. So having the December meeting as virtual will work well. Without any objection of anyone, I will advise the staff to make this change. Seeing no objection, Conti will direct you and the staff to make that change, please. And with that, I don't have any further remarks, so we're going to move on to the agenda. So to our only action item today, approving the 2 sets of draft performance targets we were briefed on last month. Eric Randall on staff will review each set of the targets. After that, I will seek a motion to adopt Resolution R3-2023 to adopt regional performance targets for highway system performance and highway assets. Now to the first major action for today. In fact, there are 3 elements within this one action item. Eric, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm here to hopefully close out the loop on the performance-based planning and programming targets for 2 performance areas, highway assets, pavement and bridge condition, and highway system performance, travel time, reliability. Again, the board was briefed about these in more detail last month. We provide opportunity for comments through the end of the month of September. No comments were received, so the targets I'm bringing to you today are the same you saw last month. I am also going to present some additional information, which I think you'll find of interest, so bear with me 1 moment. As briefed at the September meeting, this is part of the federal requirements for state DOTs, for MPOs, and transit agencies to conduct this performance-based planning and programming, or PBPP process. State DOTs, MPOs, providers of public transportation, have to adopt targets either annually or in this case for these 2 areas every 4 years on the required performance areas. We're also required to link the investment priorities, that's the projects, in the TIP and the long-range plan to the achievement of these performance targets. Right now we're wrapping up setting targets for a new 4-year cycle, the period 2022 through 2025. The state DOTs just had to submit reports on all of these as of October 1st to Federal Highway, so we're just getting copies of those from the state DOTs. And similarly, we need to set targets at the MPO level for these 2 specific performance areas. This is working. Next slide, please. Bear with me. So these were the targets we proposed last month for interstate pavement, percentage of pavement on the interstate that's in good condition and poor condition. On the rest of the national highway system, that's not the interstates, that's all your major arteries, numbered routes, again, pavement in good condition and in poor condition. And then finally, on the bridges, and again, bridges are not just bridges over rivers, but they're any basic aerial structure. So you'll see more about that in a second. But percentage of bridges, their deck area, if you will, in square meters, that's in good area and that's in poor condition. Again, these are the same targets we briefed last month that were developed in coordination with the state DOTs. There have not been any changes to them. So next slide, please. Sorry. So my colleagues in the GIS department, I want to give a big shout out to Charlene Howard and Mackenzie Bosco, have been working on trying to visualize all this information. So we have a web map that you can now access via the link there. It's still in development, so we're still making some tweaks, and this will portray for you the bridge condition. We're also going to be working on pavement condition in the coming weeks, again, trying to improve data and how we present it so that people can see more detail. So next slide, please. So if you were to go to this link, I'm just going to show some screenshots. So what you could do is you could look at all the bridges in the region. And so if you look at the grand total there's 1,448 bridges. Again, that's any aerial structure in the region. I think the Springfield interchange alone is something like 51 bridges and overpasses or aerial structures associated with it. So in the region, you can see 584 good. Most of them are in fair condition. We don't set a target for fair. Again, we only set it for good and for poor. 15 bridges are in poor condition. You can see the regional information at the bottom. Up at the top, there's a couple tabs. You can select a state or you can select a jurisdiction, and you can look at conditions for your jurisdiction, see the graphs for your jurisdiction, see who owns the highway system in your jurisdiction, and focus in on it. Next slide, please. So if we were to focus in on, coincidentally, the city of Manassas and Prince William County, we could look at the bridges in that part of the region. So for Prince William County, which in this case includes the city information, there are 114 bridges, and I can even click on one of the bridges. In this case, it should actually read Nokesville Road. There's obviously an error in the data in the National Bridge Inventory, but Nokesville Road going over Wellington and the railroad. And you can see that that bridge was constructed in 2012, that it's in good condition, and so forth. So again, you can click on any of these bridges and see what's happening in your region. Next slide, please. You can also expand the map and look at the region in more detail. Here's obviously downtown DC. You can see two red dots there for bridges that are in poor condition. The Theodore Roosevelt Bridge, which carries I-66, again, has been under weight restrictions for some time now. That bridge is reaching the end of its life. Similarly, there's a red dot right next to us here in the COG building, the H Street Bridge, right behind us, that goes over the railroad tracks. That bridge, works on it, supposed to begin in 2025, and that bridge also is in desperate need of replacement. So that's the bridge visualization. Encourage you to look it out, to check it out sometime. Again, there will be a pavement web map coming out at some point too, so you can see where areas of good and where areas of poor pavement are in your region. Otherwise, ma'am, the last slide on the presentation was a snapshot basically saying that staff recommend the approval, or excuse me, there's another slide in there which goes through the highway travel time reliability targets, again, which are unchanged since they were presented to you in September. Otherwise, ma'am, staff recommends that R3-2023 be taken up for approval to set targets for the highway assets and for the highway travel time reliability for the metropolitan planning region for the period 2022 to 2025. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Very interesting. And so before I entertain discussions on the matter, may I please have a motion to adopt Resolution R3-2023?
So moved. Loudoun County, Kristen Umstattd.
Great. Thank you. Is there a second? Great. Thank you both. Now for the discussion on the motion. Are there any questions or comments? And we'll start with the people in the room first. Gary, go ahead.
Gary Arnridge. Can you clarify, Eric, if local bridges are included in the 1,400 bridges that were in your total?
No, the federal rules per the acts of Congress and that became the Surface Transportation Acts only apply to the national highway system. So again, these are bridges on the national highway system. So that's your interstate and your other major arteries and such that are proposed by each state DOT and adopted by Federal Highway Administration into the national highway system.
So our cute little rural bridges are not included.
Correct.
They're in need of replacement. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Brian Lee of Law. As you know, our jurisdiction touches on 4 different counties, very briefly, and with 2 national highway systems. Do you know whether this report covers bridges that cross the Washington statistical region and the Baltimore statistical region, which we bump up against?
So this data is taken from the National Bridge Inventory, which all the 50-plus state DOTs report to Federal Highway Administration. We only look at the area for our region, but I'm sure that MDOT does report the information. I'm not sure if they have the same similar visualization or if Baltimore Region Transportation Board does, but we could investigate that.
Earl?
Yeah, I was going to add that I know that IJA had some special programs that have provided some funding for locals to apply for money for local bridges, separate from the federal system. You're probably aware of that, Gary. So that was at least one good step there, even though, yeah, the way he described it is how it's got to be done based on the federal requirements.
Anyone else in the room before I go to those online? Oh, sure, Takis, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. The data bridges are, I mean, it's kind of chilling to see that only a quarter is, one of the four is really reliably good. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you, what does fair condition means exactly, and when in the period of reporting, in the rounds of reporting, do we account for bridges that may deteriorate in that period that are, closer to red, closer to not fair anymore?
Yeah, this goes into an extraordinary amount of detail. You could find additional information online, particularly at the Federal Highway Administration. But bridge data is inventoried every 2 years usually. However, bridges that are approaching structural deficiency do tend to get monitored more often. That doesn't always mean they're going to be caught. Obviously, we have had some disastrous bridge failures here in the United States in the past 10, 15 years. And I remember just a few years ago, one of the interstate overpasses up along the Northeast Corridor had to be shut down because of what happened when a bridge engineer saw the underside of the bridge and called it in, and they shut the whole interstate down for several months while they did replacement. But right, this data is collected every couple of years. The DOTs go out, they have their own staff or they hire consultants who go out and follow a checklist. There's a 10-point rating scale. Different parts have to be reviewed against that checklist. Basically fair is anywhere between a 4 and a 7 in this case. So those bridges are usually perfectly adequate. I mean, they're not identified as poor or deficient. But you're right, they're not in A condition and they're not brand new, if you will. But a number of bridges, I mean, the interstate system as a whole dates back to the early 60s, and there are some bridges out there that are nearing end of life. We obviously had to replace the Woodrow Wilson Bridge 15 years ago. We're looking at the TR Bridge. The Legion Bridge will be approaching end of its life soon as well. Major projects that will have to be completed. And again, the H Street Bridge, mere feet from this room, over all our commuter rail and Amtrak tracks has to be replaced, and that's going to affect rail travel, which is very impactful for us.
Thank you. Advance notice on this is really very important. I have to tell you, we have had in my jurisdiction one example where the advance notice wasn't, sufficient, and we had to scramble. Thank you.
Ms. Henderson?
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm curious in terms of bridges that are either marked poor or fair. Do we provide any information in terms of if there has been funding for its replacement? So you keep referencing H Street, which we know is a problem, but we also know that there's funding that is appropriated for us to make those updates. So I just want to, I'm curious in terms of like the region, do we explain, okay, this is coming? Yeah.
Right. Certainly you could crosswalk the bridges that are identified as poor against the projects that we itemize in the long-range plan. And indeed the TIP, I mean, we haven't necessarily broken those out in more detail than if you were to go back and refer to those lists from June and July. But it is something we could do in more detail.
An idea, I guess, as you all build out the visual tool, that might be included.
Right. Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely. I think if it's poor condition, everyone would like to also know that there is a plan to hopefully change that before there's something terrible happens. Anyone else in the room? Okay. How about anybody online? I don't see anybody online. So for the vote then, I will ask for nays and abstentions only, and we'll start with those in the room first. So are there any nays or abstentions from anybody in the room? Okay, for those online, please state the name of your jurisdiction. When you vote, if you are not voting, I'm going to take it as only nays and abstentions. We'll start with the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, Vermont, and other agencies. Okay, so that looks like that gets approved unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just want to confirm, Ms. Henderson, that's a good idea. We will look into crosswalking what is available so that there's a broader context that we are aware we are working towards it. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate the presentation.
Of course, ma'am. You'll see me again in a few minutes, though.
I'm sure. Okay. A briefing on the 2022 State of the Commute Survey. This item that got bumped, unfortunately, from our September meeting due to time. We're glad to have back with us today Nicholas Rampos of our staff back to brief us on the state of the commute in our region. It will be interesting to learn how the region's commute today compares to the pre-pandemic period. Nick, take it away, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. There is a great deal of information in the survey, and in light of the limited time, this briefing is really going to focus on some key aspects of the commute. And I invite all of the members of the board to review the draft report and the more detailed presentation, which was in your agenda packet from today. So in terms of some survey background, we conduct the State of the Commute survey every 3 years, and it started back in 2001. And we interviewed almost 8,400 employed residents of the COG region, and we have a confidence rate of 95% plus or minus 1.1%. So it's a pretty high confidence rate in terms of the survey. This was a randomly selected postal address survey, which was conducted through the internet. And we did set minimum targets for each of the jurisdictions, with higher targets for larger jurisdictions and the jurisdictions in the center of the region. And the jurisdiction counts range from anywhere of, we had about 500, a little over 500 to just under 1,000. That confidence level was 95% plus or minus 4.3%. And we did expand the county level results to match the regional worker population. And we also weighted the data to ACS, which is American Community Survey data, to adjust the sample for race, ethnicity, and age. So some of the topics for the survey, we've had some continued tracking questions, which included current and past commute patterns, telework, commute satisfaction, commute ease, work and home location moves and the impact of those moves on the commute, access to transit, HOV express lanes and park and ride lots, commute advertising awareness and influence, awareness of commuter connections, regional and local commute service programs, employer commute assistance, as well as technology initiatives and driverless cars. We did have some new questions in the 2022 survey. We wanted to investigate the commute and teleworking before the pandemic, as well as the significance of the pandemic on commute changes and the overall telework experience. So what did we find? Well, overall, the coronavirus did have a disruption to commute patterns. That's probably no surprise to anyone in this room and or online. But some things did change, but surprisingly, some things stayed consistent. So there were widespread commute disruptions. There was an explosion of telework. There was increased use of drive alone for commute trips when commuters were not teleworking, and there were declines in transit use across all commuter characteristics. There were stable commute distance in terms of miles, but shorter commute times, and stable commute satisfaction, but a higher share of workers with easier commutes. And there was also a stable percentage of work location changes, but a higher percentage of home location changes. So when we look at worker commute changes, about 60% started or increased telework, 32% of workers shifted to full-time telework, and about 1 in 10 changed the modes they used for the days they commuted. 3 in 10 made a work change, and that included 16% that changed to a different job, and 13% who either changed their days of work or their hours. So we did ask a question which basically stated, in a typical work week, what type of transportation do you use on each of the days you work? And if we exclude telework, use of drive alone increased 14 percentage points for trips made to outside work locations.
and train use dropped by 10 points, and carpool and vanpool and bus each declined by about 2 points. Commuters who used alternative modes pre-pandemic switched modes more than did drive-alone commuters, and many of them shifted to telework, but some shifted to driving alone. And about 3 in 10 alternative mode commuters stayed in their pre-pandemic modes versus 62% of commuters who drove alone pre-pandemic. Transit lost mode share to driving alone in all subgroups in 2022. This is significant. Even amongst traditional transit populations, which would include core residents, and when I say core, I mean the District of Columbia, City of Alexandria, Arlington, core workers, younger workers, non-white workers, and workers that had limited car access. Drive-alone rates for those working in the office increased in all parts of the region. We did ask past riders why they discontinued transit use, and this included respondents who stopped riding transit between 2019 and 2022, and almost 70% of them said it was due to the pandemic. Service availability was also a factor for some because their home or work location had changed, and about a third of the reasons had to do with service attributes, such as a limited service schedule, the service taking too much time, and unreliability. In 2022, workers who commuted to outside work locations traveled an average of 16.9 miles, which is pretty similar to what we saw in 2019. And full-time teleworkers, if they would have been traveling, they would have gone about 16.3 miles for their commute. In terms of commute time, the commute time did drop. And was 37 minutes for workers who commuted to outside work locations, and that was down from 43 in 2019. And the shift of many commute trips to telework could have resulted in faster trips for those who continued commuting, but shifts from transit, which has a long average travel time, to driving alone, which pretty much has a shorter time, could have also contributed to the shorter commute times. When we took a look at HOV and express lanes time savings, respondents who said they regularly used an HOV or express toll lane for commuting estimated that using that lane saved them an average of 16 minutes for each one-way commute trip. Now, to switch the focus to telework, as I mentioned earlier, there was an explosion in teleworking. No surprise again, but it did have a dramatic impact on commuting in 2022. Nearly 1.5 million regional workers telework on a typical workday, and that represents 44% of all workers in the region. 95% said that they teleworked at least one day a week. On average, teleworkers use this arrangement about 3.37 days per week, which really, it tripled from 2019. When we took a look at the teleworking experience, almost 90% of teleworkers agreed that they were productive when they were working from home. 80% were able to coordinate with coworkers, and 66% said that they were better able to concentrate on their work. Almost half, though, found it difficult to unplug from work. So what does the future hold for telework? Over 90% of current teleworkers would like to telework at least one day a week in the future, and over 70% want to telework at least 3 days or more per week. And teleworkers who telework frequently now are most interested in frequent future teleworking. Now I'm going to just talk a little bit about home and work location changes. We asked respondents if they had made a home or work change by where they lived at the time of the survey. And nearly half of core residents made a location change in the past 2 years versus 35% of middle ring and outer ring, and 36% of outer ring residents. Core area respondents were particularly more likely to have moved their home location, was about 4 in 10, reported a home move, compared with 25% of the middle ring and 27% of outer ring residents. Core area residents also made work location changes at a higher rate, 22%, compared with 18% of the middle ring and 17% of outer ring residents. In terms of percentages of respondents that made work location changes, that varied less by where they worked at the time of the survey. Core area workers reported more home moves than did middle and outer ring workers. They were at about 25%. And it was 32% for the core workers. When we look at the ease of the commute, more commuters reported an easier commute and fewer reported a difficult commute if we compare that to 2019. And in 2022, just over a quarter of commuters said that their commute was more difficult than a year ago, but 24% said it was easier. So commuters in the region's core area reported more difficult commutes than those in the inner jurisdictions. It was like 33% versus 24% in 2022. Commutes did get worse for transit riders, and that included bus riders at 42% and train riders at 50%. When we took a look at commute satisfaction by location and time, over half of the respondents were satisfied with their commute, which is pretty much the same as what we saw in 2019. Core area residents were more satisfied than were the folks that lived, commuters that lived in the middle ring or outer rings, and satisfaction dropped as travel time increased. And when we looked at satisfaction by mode, the bicyclists and walkers were the happiest and most satisfied. Metro rail and bus riders were least satisfied. Commuters that carpooled or vanpooled or drove alone reported higher satisfaction in 2022 than in 2019. And transit riders were much less satisfied in 2022. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a technical report that was in your agenda packet, and it is finalized. It was reviewed by the Commuter Connections subcommittee as well as our state funding agencies. We are going to be working on preparing a general public report for the rest of this fiscal year, and it'll be out probably by summertime next year. But if you'd like to access that report, you could do it either through the agenda packet, but I also provided links in the presentation. And again, there's a lot more information than what I covered today, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments? Let me look around the room first. Go ahead, Casey.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I could probably ask you questions for the next hour or two. This is fascinating. It seems like there are some really good outcomes in terms of telework increasing, which has the potential to reduce congestion and move people away from driving, but also some bad trends as well with the increased driving alone and the lack of the reduction in transit use as well. And I personally found the responses regarding the reasons why people chose alternative modes also really fascinating. I had two questions about how we could maybe use this data, and then two thoughts on collecting it in the future. With regard to this data, is it possible, I noticed there was a question about, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I think it's something where we lack data. There was a question about the demographics and whether respondents had children. But was that also looked at in terms of their use of mode of transit and some of their answers to the other questions? Because I think it would be interesting to sort of cross-reference that. And then the other thought I had, which is somewhat related to that, is kind of going beyond the questions about just the commute, because I think, especially with people working from home, the ways we are quote-unquote commuting have changed. And so particularly for people with kids, you might actually be working from home, but your commute is now driving your kid to daycare and coming back home. So just wondering if that's something you could maybe look at and delve a little more deeply into.
Yeah, thanks for the question. For this particular survey, it really is focused on workers. So we did not ask questions about other household members. However, we do have a much larger survey that is conducted in the region, and it's our regional household travel survey, and that does ask many questions about other trips besides the commute trip. And I think in that data set, there might be some opportunities to, maybe get to some of that information.
Yeah, thank you. I've actually filled that one out before myself, and I found it somewhat difficult to represent in that format the trips I was taking for my own children. So I think it's just something we should kind of be a little more aware of in our data collection, because I do think it's missing a segment of trips that people are probably taking on a daily basis. A couple of other things. I wondered whether we could cross-reference some of the information about why people are using alternative modes of transit from this survey with some of our goals and strategies for GHG emissions reduction, and see if there's any connection between one of our, as an example, one of the things that we said we might look at is parking pricing. And so if one of the reasons people are saying they're using alternative modes is a reduction in cost, for example, there might be some crossover or some insights we could take from that.
Yeah, and I didn't show the data for that, but we do ask questions regarding, the benefits of using alternative modes and why people use them. And I will tell you that the number 1 and 2 reasons are time and money. Those always seem to come right out to the top. Now, that's not to say that there is an interest in, sustainability and green commuting and all of that. I mean, that is also in the mix, but it typically does not rise to the top when we're asking these particular questions. But yeah, I think it's certainly something we could probably take a look at.
I was going to say, just as an example, earlier we were talking about scenarios. If you look at some of the scenarios we've done, based on this kind of information that we have been collecting for the past 20 years, we've crafted scenarios where we could address those 2 predominant reasons: making transit less time consuming, making transit more affordable. So it is nothing new that our transit agencies are not aware of or what the drivers are. The challenges are making it viable, making it possible. You will recall the Long Range Plan Task Force. One of the aspirational initiatives is building BRT systems throughout the region, not just from one location to another, but everywhere. It could be within a large jurisdiction, there could be a BRT system. It doesn't have to come to the regional core at all, because it would address time and cost. That's kind of those are the kinds of things that we have tested and shown that these things can be effective. But anyway, I think your point is well taken, that these survey results could then be tracked against what are the scenarios. And that is exactly why I believe that this summarization of the 10, 12 scenarios and the hundreds of pages into a very simple way, if you do this, this is what you will get, right? So if we have that information, then as decision makers for you all, when you look at what projects your jurisdiction is submitting as priority, you can decide whether you want to support that or you want to make a change. Because by the time it comes to the TPB, local decisions have been made. So this summarization is really intended to help you all at your local level to say, here is what our scenarios have indicated. Right? So very good point. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then just last point, I think it would be interesting in the future to ask about personal benefits, not just for alternative modes, but for driving and driving alone, because I think it might be insightful as to why people are choosing to drive instead of using transit or other modes.
Good
Thank
point.
you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Henderson.
Thank you so much again for this presentation. Picking up sort of where Casey was around the driving piece, did we ask any questions around what type of vehicle the person is driving? I'm just curious if we are seeing an uptick in electric vehicle purchases in the region, how do we kind of weigh that out as opposed to a traditional gas-powered vehicle?
Yeah, in this particular survey, we did not ask about the type of vehicle, but we did ask how many vehicles the household did have. But we didn't ask what you know, if it was gas powered or electric or that type of thing. But that's certainly a question we could ask in,
Yeah, I guess
in the next survey.
I think for the future, for our region in particular, if we're seeing an uptick in electric vehicles, I don't know, if people feel differently in terms of, okay, how do we weigh that out in terms of our emission goals and things like that. And the other thing that, I mean, obviously, I think we all acknowledge this, but it seems like a flashing red light here in terms of the issues with transit, and the fact that you said in terms of commute satisfaction, transit was the least satisfied, and bike and walk was the most satisfied, even though someone may be spending 45 minutes in a car by themselves, they're still more satisfied than someone getting on a bus or a train. That to me is like, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. So thank you.
If I could add,
1 second.
with regards to the vehicle type, we do collect the vehicle registration data. We do that once every 3 years. And the greenhouse gas inventory information that I plan to send you all after this meeting does have the tracking of how electric or plug-in electric and hybrid vehicles have increased significant, 2 to 3-fold increase in purchasing of those vehicles. So that's a positive thing. Regrettably, even with the 2 to 3-fold increase, it is still less than a couple percentage of the vehicles that are on there. We have ways to go, but it is very clear that people are willing, manufacturers are able to provide. So I think the EV infrastructure investment that Mr. Lewis was talking about is very critical. Now it's easy to understand why the feds would say, here is $15 billion for you to build the EV infrastructure, because the people are willing to buy it, manufacturers are willing to provide it, but you need to provide them with that certainty that they can indeed complete a trip, particularly if they're going to have children in the vehicles.
So a couple things.
Someone else had their hand up first. I'll call on you next, Earl.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question on the telework days. So the survey asked how many days per week people telework. Does it ask which days per week?
We do have that information, yes. I didn't present it, though, today, but I will say just from past surveys, and I'm sure it probably hasn't changed very much, but the most popular days were Fridays and Mondays.
Yeah. I think that's actually a key.
Let's continue.
I think that's maybe the key and core issue for us, because the biggest coordination challenge, which is maybe something we're well equipped to do, is which days are people teleworking? And if everyone in the region is going to go into the office in every federal agency and every private sector office building on Wednesdays and none on Mondays and Fridays, we have a huge challenge. I mean, I can tell you with the Virginia Railway Express, we're struggling with everybody wanting to ride the train on Wednesday and nobody wanting to ride the train on Monday and Friday. So it creates huge inefficiencies in terms of how you operate the system. So I think that's really key data, and maybe there's a role for us to play moving forward in convincing federal agencies and private businesses to spread out the telework days that their employees are using, because we can't operate a transportation system that everyone uses on Wednesday, so we have to have massive capacity on Wednesdays and no one on Friday.
The good points. Now, Mr. Lewis, go ahead. So sorry.
Thank you. A couple items. Yeah, obviously EV purchases are growing in Maryland. We've gone from like 600 to 56,000 over a decade. That's 1% of our registered vehicles. That might not sound like a lot, but it's 35% annual growth rate. And if you see the curve, it's like that, and that's going to continue. It's very difficult for transit to compete with a custom ride. You're really competing on other factors with transit that we have to get people, looking at. Again, obviously, some new systems and new infrastructure like the BRT lines we're talking about, new connectivity like between Maryland and Virginia with the more guaranteed time of travel. That's obviously part of our long-term plans, but also new services like the Purple Line that'll invigorate people's imaginations about, the transit and how it can connect us better across the region, and that'll eventually hopefully get some of the riders that have left back where it fits their lives. At the same time, our transportation system is a mix. There's some people that are never going to give up their cars but there's also some people that will use transit, you know, if it was more convenient for them in terms of the routes that they have to take in their lives.
It's a good point. So we'll say someone from the outer jurisdictions, I think that's part of the problem in my jurisdiction is that by the time they can reach any type of public transportation, they see that it's not beneficial and they just continue in their single occupancy vehicle. So as we continue to expand our region, those are going to be points we're all going to have to continue to look for. Yep. Anybody else in the room? Go ahead, Tack.
Oh, so indeed we could talk along about these results. It's also, I mean, am I wrong if I say this also measures an extraordinary situation in these 2 years? You know, the incidents, for example, I don't ride transit. I mean, because I fear that, you know, health implications of that is so strong here as opposed, for example, to service is not enough. I would have expected personally more of a complaint from riders that the service levels dropped during the pandemic. Obviously, they did. So one question that I have, so did we ask or did we at all have any data on during the pandemic, several employers have made destination parking free or very, very easily available. They were inviting their workers to drive in. Did we pick up any signal from that, and how incidental is that for the high driver loan rate?
Great question. It is a slide that I do have, and I presented to our tech committee. But yes, we did ask the commuters about parking, and one of the things we saw was a huge uptick in free parking or reduced parking, particularly in the core area. Not so much in the middle or outer rings, but and obviously a lot of parking charges occur in the core area. I mean, there are probably some employers that also charge for parking in the middle ring. And it's probably highly unlikely that there are outer ring employers charging for parking. But yeah, we did see an uptick in that, and I think part of that you can correlate towards the scenario that you just outlined.
So, Mr. Cantones, on very good point. The thing with this data is this is the earliest look of pre-COVID to, I don't know if I can even say post-COVID, but as we're coming out of COVID.
Peak COVID.
Yeah. So the influences here are significantly based on the disruptions to travel and work arrangements, right? So I think this speaks to a couple things that I see already happening in the region. The disruptions and this kind of change in travel behavior sent a signal for us to re-examine our bus routes and bus service, the service equity, the fare equity, you know. So Alexandria came out of the gate and done it. They redid their services. WMATA is now working at Prince George's County has partnered with WMATA to do it. So I think a re-examination of our bus systems to make it provide them with the time savings, with the cost savings, make it convenient, to build back that ridership, something that Mr. Allen was talking about last year when he was the chair. So that is one part of what is driving this, right? The second part is, and this is the difficult part, teleworking, as Ms. Henderson and Ms. Kostick has noted, while has clear benefits to greenhouse gases, reducing congestion, also has this unintended negative benefit on transit systems that we have invested a lot of money, not just capital, but we continue to invest a lot of operating money every year. If you're not able to gain that ridership fares, what does this level of telecommuting, right? In our region, it took almost 25 years for the region to reach an average of 1.1 day per week teleworking. 25 years. And then within 1.5 years, it went to 3.4. That is a significant issue that will happen. Will this stay? So it's very good for certain of the TPB goals, but it is not as good for some of the other TPB goals. So, but this is also something that I don't know to what extent policymakers in our region are willing to say, I'm going to, because Mr. Walkinshaw's point is excellently made. If there is going to be such a peaking of our infrastructure use, how does one decide on investments, on building the system capacity? Within WMATA, we have some examples. They have peak of the peak fares, and that kept going up, and because they wanted people to use the hours and minutes outside of the peak. That is something you can do on a fare structure. How do you do that on physical infrastructure? So I think those are some of the issues. So I think this is kind of why I wanted the board to dig deeper into some of these things. I wouldn't suggest we take anything here as something that will remain with us, but I would take this as an opportunity to examine what kinds of investments and approaches we'll be taking for making changes to our transportation system moving forward.
Okay, and for a matter of time, Mr. Snyder's online, has had his hand up for a long time. I would like to ask anyone else that has any questions to either send that to staff or put it in the chat. Mr. Snyder, hopefully you can keep it somewhat brief since we're already over time on this particular item.
Keep it brief, Madam Chair. Quick question for Conti. The greenhouse gas reductions that he was talking about, is that for the year 2020, which was the pandemic, the shutdown year, or other years? But on the point that was made, it's almost like whatever we observe today is going to be different tomorrow. And so I think one other area of interest will be the non-commuting trips. And finally, this underscores, with so many people continuing to use the highways, the significance of converting to the electric vehicle fleet and everything we can to support that. So let me just ask Connie the greenhouse gas reduction question, and thanks for this work.
Sure, thank you. The greenhouse gas inventory was for 2020. So whatever impact the COVID disruptions might have had during the entire year are reflected in those greenhouse gas emission changes. There have been some increases, some decreases because of the impact.
Okay, great, thanks. Earl, like I said, I'm going to go on to the next item.
It's going to be real quick. I can just say that Maryland, we met our greenhouse goal by 2020 as part of the region also, but we even corrected it for the pandemic, and we still met our 2020 goal. And we have a more aggressive goal than even TPB, which is 60% by 2031. So, we're working through that now, how we can get there.
Great. I mean, I think we all could go on with this subject for a very long time. The report is very long. A lot of the things I encourage everyone here and the public to go to the TPB website, and you can pull this up, like you said, the links are there, and lots of good information that we can all take back to our localities. And we're going to see the continued effects of the pandemic, and I do believe that there's a lot more local trips happening now that people are teleworking. It's now more single occupancy trips versus less because of that, just moving around in their communities while they're teleworking. And to move on, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next item, if that's okay with everybody. We've talked about building back transit ridership, kind of a great segue from our conversation, after the significant reductions during the peak of the pandemic. We've also recognized how important bus service is and how can we improve the bus services in our region. Eric, welcome back again from staff, who will brief us as an updated analysis of bus transit service in our region that looked at bus service frequency and coverage in relation to the equity emphasis areas and demographics. Thanks again.
Right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. The two main stories of 2020 were the pandemic and equity. And so we've been increasing our equity work over the past couple of years, board resolutions and so forth. And so this is an update on work that we've been having completed for us earlier this year on equity in relation to local bus transit service. So I have a short PowerPoint, and then I hope to show you a little bit of the web map, and I'll try to wrap this up quickly. But again, this work was actually brought to the board last year in a first iteration, and so we've had it updated again for 2022. I'll show you a sample map, some of the key findings, and then hopefully do a very quick demonstration of the web map. So last year, we did brief the board, October 2021, here we are a year later, looking at bus transit service in the region, again, local bus transit. So we're not looking at commuter buses, and we're not looking at rail stations. We don't normally move rail stations around, though I think many people will have seen the news this morning that it looks like the Dulles rail line might finally be near to opening, perhaps in just a few weeks. But we're looking at local bus service because that's the service that provides coverage and that particularly people who are traditionally disadvantaged, people of color, low income, non-native English speakers, and so forth need access to that bus transit service throughout the day to get to where they need to go, want to go. And so what we look at bus service versus where all this populations are located. And I want to thank our consultants, ICF Consulting, and Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning, who did much of this work for us. There's both a memo, a couple-page memo by myself, and an 18-page report that goes through all the findings of this analysis in your mail-out materials. I encourage you to take a look at it when you have an opportunity, lots of numbers, but also provides a lot more detail about what's happening in the region. Some key findings, not much different from last year. 60% of the population in the region is within a quarter mile of a local bus stop. So we're still talking about million-plus people who don't live near a bus stop for many reasons, of course, where they're located in the region. Only just over a third, 35% of people have access to 15-minute or better service during the peak. That's just the peak. 15-minute is really sort of the limit when you can just walk out and wait for that next bus. After that, you're trying to figure out when the schedule is, gets a lot more complicated. Travel becomes difficult, doesn't favor local transit. Traditionally disadvantaged groups have higher access to bus stops. They tend to live in areas that we've provided bus service to. But again, only 65% of people of color, 74% of low-income households. So still a lot of people don't have access to bus stops at all, let alone within frequent service. Same finding here as last year, the low percentage of access to frequent service, even in the peak. So we're not even talking about the midday or night or weekends or all the other times people have to travel, remains a concern, particularly for quality of life and job access. So where do we need to put that transit? So I'm about to show you a web map. You'll see the link. Just to give you a visual portrayal, it shows everything in color. In this case, this is where people of color live in relation to local bus stops. Okay, where people have access to bus stops is shown in blue, and the darker the blue, the more access they have. Where people don't have access to local bus stop is in red, and the darker the red, the denser the people in that block, census block or what have you, don't have access to transit. Now the web map, this is what the link would be, and let's see if I can figure out the, let's see if it's already up. Yes, it is already up, so let me figure out how to share this. Share, hopefully you will now see the link on your screen in somewhat small detail, unfortunately. But so this is the map you can go to. You hit OK. It has a number of layers on it. Right now we're seeing the transit equity areas and the jurisdictions. Up on the upper right are all the tabs. So if I go over to this information tab at the far right, this gives you all the language about the tab and how it would work. I can go through other layers here. I can, let me get this out of the way. I can click on and off equity emphasis areas. So no equity emphasis areas, click, here they are. If you zoom in, you can see where these areas are, mostly in the eastern half of the region. If I do a line north-south through the region, many areas on the right, Prince George's, Ward 7 and 8 in the district, but also areas in other portions of the region, down Richmond Highway, in Fairfax County, and so forth. I can click on the briefcase, shows me where jobs are, and I can click on something like total job accessibility in the region. So this is almost like a heat map of the region. Most of the jobs you can get to on local transit are in the core of DC, but you can also see a kind of purplish blend out there by the Beltway, in Tysons and McLean, and then further out in Reston-Herndon area, and then up I-270. If you look over to the east, again, we don't have much access to jobs over in the eastern half of the region. Well-known issue, something that has implications for travel and for access to jobs for people. We have an equity needs index where we try to put all this information together in just one simple number. Where those dark green areas are on this particular map is where the populations are located that need access to transit service. Again, so I can click through various layers. There's an exclamation mark here which shows what happened with the pandemic, and I can click in it and I can see bus services that have and have not necessarily been restored since the pandemic. There is still several percentage of bus service that is not back yet. So let me make sure I don't have too many layers clicked, because then that creates an issue as well. I can click on distribution of transit service and get that people of color map I showed, or other maps such as zero-car households, veteran populations, job access, and so forth. I can click on a transit map, get hours of service. And finally, again, I can just look at the jurisdictional map or the equity emphasis area. So very high speed. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I encourage each of you, though, if you have time, to click in this link, look at your particular jurisdiction, look at the census blocks, go through the layers, and say, hey, does this area have enough transit? Maybe this area needs some more transit, and so forth. Again, information that we're providing to decision makers. I will say that we do have teed up for the next meeting, hopefully, Metro coming in. As many of you may be aware, Metro has kicked off its Better Bus campaign, one aspect of which is looking at Metro Bus network. Where does Metro Bus serve in the region, frequencies, routes, and so forth. We hope to have them come to you next month to talk about that, because again, Metro provides 2/3 of the bus service in the region, 1/3 of the transit service. What Metro Bus could look like in the future. It's a very aggressive schedule study that they're embarking on. Hopefully you have a chance to review the materials and talk about that next month. Again, this is work that we're trying to contribute regionally, again, with everybody who's working on it. Montgomery County is working on it. Alexandria has finished it. Everybody's working on trying to improve bus service equity in the region. One tool to provide more information. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really cool tool that I think will be very helpful to all jurisdictions to be able to get more information. Let me go ahead and let you start with the questions.
Certainly, we've made the information available to them. I haven't, looked at the web statistics recently, but certainly they're aware of it. We've briefed it at Tech Committee, at the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee, as well as other venues. So we provide that information, and we're also making use of it internally ourselves.
Montgomery County has its own tool, very similar. So it's the same kind of people putting all the data together for Ride-On. So we have a very sophisticated tool as well that we're using for our Ride-On Reimagine study. It should be very comparable.
Again, I'll just make one other point, which is kind of obvious, but one of your slides talks about proximity to high quality versus long trips on and everything.
Yes.
So the thing is working a little bit intention. You can't have a bus stop that's close to Iowa and have that be a bus on a ride. So,
you're right. Coverage versus frequency is one of the key paradigms of looking at transit service. Do we provide more coverage? Do we provide higher frequency service? Because it's tough to provide both.
You're welcome. It's always, that's always one of the difficulties with transit is where that access is at. Anyone else in the room, or before I go to anyone online? Okay, seeing no hands. It looks like Dan. Is that right? Yeah, Dan.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Emerine for the DC Office of Planning. Mr. Randall, thank you for the presentation. And just, I guess, kind of maybe to build on the coverage versus frequency question, and thinking about what the white paper is showing us, if it's showing us how many people have access to transit at all, or especially frequent transit, as I'm looking at the maps, to a large extent, this is showing that what you would expect, there's greater transit access and greater frequent transit access the more dense the area or corridor is. And so I'm just wondering if you have any additional thoughts about that we could glean from the report. I remember that Metro, for some time now has been sharing service guidelines with the region to help better plan. And a lot of that, again, is based on density. So if there are more either household dense or jobs dense areas that lack frequent transit, that could be a service gap that needs to be addressed. But if we're also lacking service in some areas, it simply may be that there aren't sufficient households or jobs to run efficient service, right? And so just wondering how that can provide some guidance to our colleagues like myself who are working in the land use arena.
So we are limited in the resources with which we can address some of those questions. Every jurisdiction, every transit agency has dedicated staff to work on this area. We are trying to provide the best information we have with the tools we have. If you go into detail in the memo, it does specify a number of geographical areas, neighborhoods, if you will, that we've pinpointed through the analysis as specific areas to consider across the region. And so that's one tool. But again, using that mapping tool, people who are interested in equity, people who are planning transit service, I think is what we're trying to provide you the tools with which to do a great job.
Thank you. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Randall, again, for all the presentations today. To the last item for today, an important item. We just wrapped up the 4-year update of our long-range transportation plan. We had decided that we will not wait another 4 years to do the next update. Instead, we will do one in 2 years, meaning in 2024. Staff has been working with our agency staff to develop both a work program and schedule in order for us to do this. We will hear from them. Conti, do you want to set the stage for us? And then Stacy Cook will go over the details.
Sure. I know earlier, as part of your remarks, I was asked to provide some thoughts on it, which I have done. But just a couple of things I would like to say, that this 2024 plan update will be noticeably and substantively different than other updates that at least I've been involved in since 1995 in 3 important ways, in my view. One, this update will be asking each TPB member agency, whether it's a roadway agency, transit agency, to re-examine all of the projects that they have currently planned and included in the TPB's long-range plan, and to determine if this is indeed the set of projects that the agency would now like to invest its transportation dollars to help meet the mobility and accessibility needs of our region for the next 25 years, right? So are these the investments they would make based on what we now see? Earlier we talked in the State of the Commute survey. What does the new normal look like? That's a challenge that we are all working on, but still, based on what we know today, are these the investments we would be making, knowing the challenges that we have and being aware of the opportunities we also have? Every challenge is an opportunity. Whether the challenge is of the increased project costs. We've talked about supply chain disruptions. We've talked about inflation. The challenge of making transportation infrastructure and our operations more sustainable and resilient. That's been another issue. Or the challenge of meeting our energy and climate goals, right? These are some of the challenges. What are some of the opportunities? Can we take opportunity to take advantage of the increased federal funds, significantly higher levels of federal funding that local and states can leverage to generate additional funds? Or the opportunity to utilize the unprecedented level of readiness of our people to make different travel choices? How can we facilitate them to make those choices? And the second way that this update is different is that the TPB will be asking each member agency to more directly correlate the projects and programs they propose for the TPB's plan with the TPB's planning priorities. We have had, since 1995 or 1997, we have been adopting a set of regional planning priorities or goals, if you will. So we are working on it. That also is about 4 or 5 different documents that runs hundreds of pages. We are now boiling it down to 4 or 5 pages to say, here are the specific transportation planning priorities that this board has adopted on a consensus basis. So we would like for the members to correlate their projects more directly with one or more of those goals. That's the second way. Again, I said earlier, we are making this the central theme. Not that this was never done, but we are making this the central theme. And the third way I think this will be different is the TPB will be asking its members to use the results of the scenario analysis. And I've talked extensively about what that is and how that can inform. Now, at the staff level, we've been thinking about how to do it all by 2024, because Gary asked the question, why is that now, that time frame, why has it become critical? And it is very critical. So we've been working on it. We've been talking with the state DOTs, local DOTs, VRE, WMATA, MARC. One thing we have heard from them all, this is going to be a lot of work. For us, your staff, that's fine. We are ready. But for your local jurisdiction staff, this is going to be asking a lot of questions. There are more than 440 project entries in our long-range plan coming from 23 member jurisdictions. We are telling them, we are going to give it all back to you. And we want you to look at each one of them and look at them through the lens of the policy priorities, look at them through the lens of the scenario finding results, and then you decide which ones you want to bring back to us. And whatever you bring back to us will have to have funding behind it. It can't be a wish list because that's the federal requirement. So it's going to be a lot of work. Whenever in the past we used to do the update, we would give your staff 45 days to do this. And generally around November, December timeframe, and every year when I was not at COG, I always used to complain that that's not a good time or good enough time or good time of the year. This time we are working additional time. We are going to take at least 5 months to do this. Second important thing we are planning to do, we are planning to hold information sessions for you all, TPB board members, with your jurisdiction staff, so that your jurisdiction staff can inform you all what are all the projects that they're thinking about. But very importantly, it will be an opportunity for you as a board member to provide your expectations to your transportation agencies. Hey, I would like to see these kinds of priorities met in the projects you bring. I think having that conversation early on is critical. What I've observed here is TPB board members, many of them are seeing the complete list of projects from their own jurisdiction when it is come to us at the very last stage. We are going to try and change that. So we will be establishing work sessions. All the Maryland members will be invited, and all the Maryland agencies will be invited. All the Virginia members will be invited, Virginia agencies, DC members and DC agencies. So we are planning on doing all of that. We are building additional time into that. So there's a significant amount of these kinds of thought out activities that we have received as input from your staff, and that's what you will see. So that's another way that this will be interesting. My closing remark is we have a lot of anticipation for this plan to be substantively different and to make a significant advance towards our regional goals. How successful we will be is going to depend on each one of you and how engaged you will be with your jurisdictions and your agencies. Because again, the project selections are done there. The decisions on which projects get funded are done there, not here. TPB can say stop, which is not really a very constructive way of moving forward. So we are ready to assist the board in this. So we're certainly excited to be underdoing this robust update. With that, I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thank you, Director Sukanth, for your comments. So for this agenda item number 10, the materials include a memorandum that walks through what I'll be providing some details to go over some of the ideas that Conti has described, as well as this presentation. The memorandum does include a preliminary schedule for this draft plan update. And your staff have not been slouching around during the last few months since the last update. We've been very busy working on numerous activities to support your priorities in regional planning, including developing the approach to this update and numerous materials to support it. And so we'll go through that now. First and foremost, I believe Director Sukkant informed you in September that the federal partners moved very quickly to approve our conformity analysis. So that restarts the clock. Our next plan would officially be due August 25th, 2026. But as Director Sukkant noted, there are numerous reasons why we want to expedite that, including that our board has asked us to do that. So what are the major changes and activities that we'll be undertaking for this plan update? First, we'll be updating the non-transportation elements, such as population and households. We'll be updating the financial plan with revisions, and I'm going to go through all of these in more detail. We'll be updating and working with our Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee to update motor vehicle emission budgets. And we'll, as Conti just described, be really re-examining with you and the technical staff and facilitating a process to re-examine and request resubmission of projects for the plan. This listing goes over in detail what the next slides cover, so sort of a good resource if you want a snapshot of some of these major activities. So what are these non-transportation updates? As you know, the Council of Governments, Department of Planning and Community Services works with all of your local jurisdictions to gather their approved forecast to create our cooperative forecast. They've been moving toward 2050. We didn't have that for our last plan. We couldn't do a 2050 horizon. But we will be using a 2050 horizon for this plan. That will be critical for the reasons that Director Sukkant has already noted, in order to ensure that you can continue, your technical agencies can continue to make amendments. One thing that I think is worth noting is that 2050 cooperative forecast of where our populations and households will include latest planning assumptions. Some jurisdictions are changing their forecast based on COVID implications. And then there will also be a 2020 census data update that will be used for this cooperative forecast. So there's a lot of changes to those non-transportation inputs, which are really important because when we do our performance analysis, you see that so much of the impact on the transportation system has to do with the growth in population and housing and where those are. So the next major change we'll make is the financial plan. In November of 2021, Congress did pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We see $12 to $20 billion extra dollars potentially over the next 20 plus years from that, but a lot of that gets eaten up, unfortunately, due to the inflation that has had such a significant impact on project costs, which we're already hearing about from our members. But we'll also have 5 additional years. So we will see projects now going out beyond 2045 up through 2050. We'll be working with your technical staff in order to gather all of the inputs in order to do this update and to bring you a preliminary analysis next summer. Another major change in activity. This gets really technical. I'm going to walk through it a bit. Our specialists have helped us, navigate these waters, but we do not have control. We do not get to choose how we proceed when it comes to air quality conformity. This is entirely based on federal requirements that we must respond to. And so we do our best to work with our Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, our state partners, in order to respond to federal requirements. So some key things that we have to think about, and I'm going to try and be quick here because of time, but we do have to use a new model. We have to do numerous updates to the motor vehicle emissions budgets, and we have to get those budgets adopted through an interagency called consultation and coordination process with action from MWAC. We also need to submit those budgets to the EPA and anticipate they're finding them adequate for use in conformity so we can actually use them. We can't submit a new plan if those budgets aren't found adequate for use in conformity by the EPA. So that's really important hurdles. We could spend lots of time talking about this, but the bottom line is this will be a very important driving factor in the timeline. Number 4, and I'll dive into this a little bit more in detail, project resubmission. We are providing several tools to support project resubmission, but including data that your technical agencies will have the chance to review regarding what projects are exempt and non-exempt based on the language of the resolution. And we'll be bringing to you a list of those projects, kind of rolled up at a high level, not every little project record, but the major projects. And then in order to be able to facilitate those conversations with you and your technical staff of what projects might be removed, revised, or resubmitted in whichever way our local agencies find works best. So we'll be coordinating in early 2023 in order to have those conversations with you after the technical input solicitation begins. A few other things to consider. I think Director Kristokanth has already really indicated this is a fresh start, a chance for everyone to resubmit all data into the database, to be very intentional about those projects that are being resubmitted, and to make sure that we're actually providing time. So we're providing at least 5 months to have those conversations. We understand that costs may change over time too, so we'll be making sure that we have final updates in spring of 2023. But we are providing a lot of time because this will take a lot of work, and we're trying to send the message that technical staff need to have that additional time, as well as leadership, because these are going to be important conversations. So what are we providing to you, to the technical members, and of course to the public as part of this technical input solicitation? This is different. We are trying to make our extremely broad policy framework more accessible. If you've looked at Visualize 2045, we have pages in there just to even summarize our policy framework. So we have taken a step to synthesize it. We'll be sharing it with you in November in order to reflect all of the main points that you as our board has tried to get across as to what's important as far as regional goals, to be reflective of it without being so many words. So we'll be presenting this to you as a matter of principles, goals, your priority strategies that you've endorsed, and the impact we look to have through that regional planning process. Also important, we do a study approximately every 18 months in order to look at scenarios. There's been a lot of lessons learned. A lot of the priority strategies have come directly from the scenarios, and we have been spending a lot of time to wade through this information, to pull our heads together on how to communicate it effectively so that your technical staff and you don't have to go through all of those documents. So we're really looking to provide a useful, very high level document that gets to the point about what the various impacts are. If we build only transit projects and no roadway, only roadway and no transit, what's the impact of travel demand? Do you remember from the Long Range Plan Task Force? It has a huge impact, but there's so much that we've studied. We're going to compile it all in one place so that people have easy access to have those robust conversations that we look to have about the projects, programs, and policies being submitted. Also acknowledging some of the strategies that are endorsed by the TPB won't be in that constrained element. We're just not going to see EV charging stations in the constrained element. But advancing EV is very important, as you've demonstrated in your own goal setting and strategy endorsement in June. So we'll be balancing that conversation to keep us all on the same page as we move forward. But I'll be coming back to you in November to present these documents, summarizing them, and giving you the chance to review them before our December meeting. So I'll bring this down to 1 minute, since I know you'd all like to go do your next thing in the day. This fall, we're already starting to work with your technical agencies to prepare for the zero-based budgeting process in order to wade through a lot of data to help determine what should be considered exempt and not exempt based from the zero-based budgeting process based on the resolution language. In early winter, we'll work with you to initiate the technical input solicitation that will not be 45 days, but closer to 5 months to have those conversations. And we'll work with you to schedule those work sessions with your technical staff. In spring of 2023, we'll get the final inputs, draft and final inputs for the technical input solicitation, get those materials out for public comment. We'll present all of the information to you that we typically do around the time of that technical inputs as we were getting those finalized and for a comment period. So we'll be presenting the air quality conformity inputs, draft scope, cooperative forecast, the financial plan, all of those. In order to get us started, we'll come back to you with public comments, and then we'll ask you to approve those inputs. That'll start our analytical process, which will begin late 2023. We are able to start the analysis for the air quality conformity, updating our model networks and all sorts of analytical activities, even if our budgets aren't yet approved, even if we're waiting for the EPA to find them adequate for conformity. Well, we do hope to already have that taken care of, early on in the process. But nonetheless, we don't need to wait to begin that. So your approval of the inputs will initiate that analysis. We'll continue to work on that for 9 or 10 months. And we're hoping that by spring of 2024, we will have the EPA finding those motor vehicle emissions budgets adequate for conformity. The rest of the process is pretty consistent with what you're used to. We'll get the inputs in summer. We'll come back to you with a draft plan, the draft air quality conformity findings. We'll release those for public comment as well. We'll bring you those comments. And then we'll wrap up with asking for your approval of this plan. So 2 years from now, maybe a blink of an eye. It may not be that long before I'm standing here making that ask in December of 2024, but we have a lot of work to do between now and then. That's our high-level overview of the details, and I conclude my comments and return it to you, Chair.
Thanks, Stacey. If the members have any thoughts or suggestions, because we are out of time today, please email them to Conti or drop them in the chat, and everyone will get back to you with your answers. The next meeting will be an in-person hybrid meeting on November 16th here. Please plan to attend in person so you can enjoy the Thanksgiving lunch that is traditional here. As we get back to normal. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Like I said, if you could put anything in the chat to Conti and them, because we are over time and in respect to people's time,
I just think it's important to thank our staff for this. Several of us have been on this board for 13 years and are thrilled to see this change. So thank you very much for this opportunity to reimagine what we can do as a region. So I appreciate very much this change.
I agree. Okay, with that, we're adjourned.